Welcome to the Thinking Legal podcast with me, David Kerner. This is a podcast about the human and psychological aspects of the legal sector. I run The Marketing Legal, a legal marketing agency, and you can find us at www.themarketinglegal.com. I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to the podcast, and today I'm talking to Dr. Larry Richard, who is an expert in the psychology of lawyers and founded LawyerBrain, which is an organization which applies a variety of neuroscience and psychological principles to the legal sector. Larry, thank you for joining me.
My pleasure, David. Thanks for inviting me.
And I think probably a good place to start would be to hear a bit about yourself and your background and how you what led you to start LawyerBrain.
Sure. I started out in life as a lawyer, and when I say started out, I mean at age 2 or thereabout. I grew up in a family of lawyers. My father, grandfather, aunts, uncles, cousins. We even have some suspicions about the family dog. So lots of lawyers in the family. And I just assumed it was the career for me. So I did all the requisite pre-law in my undergrad college years and then went to law school. And from day one, I really didn't feel like it was a good fit for me. But I stuck it out. And I went into practice, and it should have been a sign that I changed practices about every 18 months. And after 5 or 6 jobs, trying different types of mostly litigation, the last 2 were more transactional work, I just realized it's the wrong field. And when I did some soul searching, I realized that the through line in all of my career choices really was psychology. I was much more interested in human behavior and relationships and motivations and things like that than in what I considered more dry legal analysis. So I decided that I had already invested so much of my life in the legal world, 3 years of law school, all of my growing up, 10 years of practice. I said, I'm just going to go back and earn a PhD in psychology, and I'm going to study lawyers. Mainly, initially it was to figure out why I went down the wrong path and didn't realize it. What explains my poor choice? And then how do I understand lawyers? Because everybody else in my family seemed to really love practicing law. And so that's what I did. In fact, my doctoral dissertation, the final paper for my research, was a study of over 3,000 lawyers in every jurisdiction in the United States and their personality preferences. And I was shocked to find that the people who go into law had profiles that were dramatically different from the normal public. So that's what started me on this path.
Yeah, and that's a really good segue into your work, and you talk a lot about the lawyer personality. So perhaps you could describe the lawyer personality and how it differs from other kind of professional personalities.
Sure. So I started, my initial research was using the Myers-Briggs, which is a well-known test. And I published that original dissertation research in 1993 and actually had a story on the cover of the American Bar Association Journal about it. And then in 1995, I had already earned my doctorate, but there were some studies published that were done by very credible, serious scholars criticizing the Myers-Briggs and undercutting its efficacy as a tool. It didn't kill the beast. It's still very popular and widely used, but to anyone who's trained in psychology, it basically marginalized the Myers-Briggs as a serious test. It's not really useful for selection or hiring or for anything that requires prediction. It's a good tool for understanding differences at a kind of superficial level, and I still use it for that. But I wanted something that was more scientific, more reliable, more industrial strength that would be recognized at a scientific level. And so I tried myself a number of different tools. And the one that spoke the best to the legal profession was a test called the Caliper Profile. It had been around since 1964. And I looked at its technical manual, the statistics for reliability and validity, and they were excellent. But what really sold me on it is I gave it to a test group of lawyers, and the traits that it reported on really made sense to them. It had what we call face validity. When you look at your scores, you go, oh yeah, I know exactly what you're describing here. And so I went with that test. And now fast forward to today, it's been almost 30 years since I started using the caliper. And I've now tested close to 8,000 lawyers, including several hundred leaders in law firms and corporate legal departments. And what I've learned from that set of data is just like the Myers-Briggs, lawyers are outliers. Their scores are very atypical, and they're very similar to each other. So I can summarize it this way, David. The caliper measures 21 independent personality traits. Each one of them is scored on a percentile scale, 0 to 100. And people will score anywhere in that range. But when you take the aggregate of some group, let's say an occupational group like accountants or teachers or bus drivers, and you look at their scores, despite the individual variations, the highs and lows cancel out, and you get scores that average in the middle. So just about every occupation, all 21 of the traits will score as an average, between 40 and 60%. That's what we expect, except for one occupation. And that, of course, is the legal profession. We not only have one or two scores that average below 40 or above 60, we have 7 of the 21 traits that average below 40 or above 60. This is startling.
Yes.
This is unprecedented. There's just nothing else on record that has this magnitude of departure from the norm. And so these 7 traits define lawyers, and they are as follows. Number 1, we have really, really off the charts high skepticism. We're very suspicious. We challenge any assertions that people make. We pay attention to the 5% that's problematic and ignore the 95% that's fine. We are suspicious about people's motives. It's all that stuff. And the reason we do that is, number 1, we're trained in law school to think like that because it's an essential skill for practicing law. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing to think skeptically because it's how we protect our clients. And number 2, in addition to the training, low skeptics drop out of law school at a disproportionate rate, so that concentrates high skeptics. And then number 3, when you get out into practice, you use this and get rewarded for using this thinking every day. So it reinforces and deepens and strengthens the trait. So that's why skepticism, when I measure it among partners, is 90% as an average. Number 2, incredibly high autonomy. Most people don't like being told what to do, but the average score is 50% for the public. For lawyers, it's 89%, almost as high as skepticism. In other words, lawyers are basically saying, don't tell me what to do. Now, the good news is the reason that people with high autonomy go into law in the first place is being a lawyer is a very autonomous job. There's no one looking over your shoulder. Even if you're in a huge law firm with thousands of lawyers, you run your own practice. Nobody tells you how to practice law unless you're in training. Once you're a partner, you decide how to call the shots, so that people who need high autonomy find it in the practice of law. Number 3, We're very high in abstract reasoning, which is a trait that has to do with enjoying analysis, abstract thinking, problem solving, legal analysis, and people who like that stuff enjoy arguing. So, and usually when I'm explaining this to a group, somebody in the group yells out, "No, we don't." I've heard that joke so many times, but it's still fresh. So we like to argue and analyze, and that actually, a lot of studies indicate that that is the number one criterion for people who choose law school. Law school will give me a chance to flex my intellectual muscles. Number 4, we're very high on urgency. If your listeners are at this point saying to themselves, "Come on, man, you don't have to go through all this depth. Just give us a list of the damn 7 traits. I don't have time." That's urgency. That's people who are tapping their toe. They're trying to figure out, how do I get to the finish line? They don't want to be where they are. They want to be where they're going. And that's actually a good thing for practicing law, especially in private practice, because people bring their most urgent, pressing problems to lawyers and they want them solved yesterday. So it stands to reason that somebody who's dispositionally impatient, high urgency, is going to do a better job. They're going to get the thing moving compared to somebody who's kind of very laid back and lackadaisical. So it's the profession rewards urgency, and that's why we see higher levels of it. Of course, there's always 2 edges to these traits. So high urgency undercuts leadership because leaders have to listen to their constituents so those constituents feel heard, so that they feel, I'm willing to buy into the leader's agenda. And if you're urgent, you may not have as easy a time of it getting your constituents to feel like you heard them. Those are the 4 traits that are above average. There are 3 traits below average. Number 1 is sociability. Sociability, a high score on sociability means somebody has a strong comfort with emotional vulnerability. If I'm high on sociability, I'm willing to disclose private vulnerabilities so that you feel like I've entrusted you with this sacred, piece of information, and that makes you reciprocate. You're more willing to share your inner demons. And we then, by that sharing, we build a connection, an authentic, intimate relationship. And there's a lot of research in the last 10, 15 years showing that relationships of this sort, authentic, intimate connections with people, are really, really important for good health, both mental and physical, for life satisfaction, and for work satisfaction. And unfortunately, the legal profession is still kind of trapped in the 1980s, thinking that relationships are silly, touchy-feely, trivial, peripheral, not that important. So we often roll our eyeballs. Even when I talk about these traits, lawyers go, "Oh, here it comes, touchy-feely, unicorns and balloons." But it's not. There's science behind this that shows how important this stuff is. Lawyers are not good at this. The public, of course, averages 50%, 50. Lawyers average 12.5%. 12.5%. So my standing joke on this is I have it on good authority that a potted plant is 8%. So we're very low. We're very awkward and uncomfortable with relationships. We're private. We don't share a lot of vulnerable things. We'd like to keep the conversation at a more superficial level. Number 6 is resilience. Resilience as a personality trait is about how we cope with adversity, stress, mainly interpersonal stress like criticism or rejection. Someone criticizes you, someone forgets your birthday, someone doesn't invite you to a meeting and you feel left out. Those types of adverse events, people who have strong interpersonal relationships can overcome that. Relationships are one of the mediating factors in resilience, but we don't have good relationships. So that makes it more likely that we're going to be low in resilience. The second thing is your mindset. people who have a more glass half full mindset, a positive, optimistic mindset, tend to frame the adverse events that happen to them in a more positive way. They look for solutions. They think about the best case scenario. Pessimists, on the other hand, glass half empty people, think about the worst case scenario, and that lowers their resilience. And one attribute of the legal profession is one I've already mentioned, and that is our high skepticism. Because of our high skepticism, we're constantly reinforcing pessimistic, glass half empty thinking. And so that high skepticism, that very trait that we need to practice law, drives our resilience into the basement and keeps it there. So that's such a strong phenomenon. My data show that 9 out of 10 lawyers have a resilience score in the bottom half. This is just unprecedented. And it's so stunning that the American Bar Association asked me to write a book about this trait. Why are lawyers so low, and what can be done about it scientifically? And so I've just finished that book. It should be out at the end of the year.
Wonderful.
It's tentatively titled Thin-Skinned: Why Lawyers Are So Defensive and the New Science That Can Help. So look for that at the end of Q4.
Excellent.
The last trait, and those 6 traits, David, are outliers from the very beginning. The very first time I ever measured lawyers, those traits stood out as atypical. The 7th trait has always been low, but it's never passed the below 40% line. And so technically I couldn't call it an outlier. And that is a trait called cognitive empathy. Now, there's actually 2 kinds of empathy. There's emotional empathy, which when we say the word empathy, that's what people usually think of. That's when we share the emotions of another person. So suppose your dog died and I say, oh, I'm so sorry to hear it. That must be painful. That's emotional empathy, stepping into the shoes of another emotionally and sharing their experience. Cognitive empathy uses a different region of the brain. It's a different process. It's more intellectual. It's about understanding other people, paying attention to their experience, not just your own, anticipating how what you say or do will land on other people. It's a very important trait for any business, important for practicing law, important for generating new clients, important for retaining old clients, important for leading, important for following. It's important for a lot of things. And it has always been, like I said, relatively low 40s. But in the last 10 years, it's been dropping. It's now about 38% and going down. And what I've learned from other studies is it's not just lawyers. It's the entire millennial cohort. That is, anyone born from 1982 to 1998. Millennials have 40% less cognitive empathy than the previous generation. To which millennials said, yeah, whatever. So this is really important because it's dropping around the world in this one age group. And it's certainly affecting the overall average for the legal profession. So those are the 7 traits, and they affect everything. They affect how you practice law. They affect how you develop business, how you retain clients, how you deal with other people, how you lead and manage and supervise and mentor, and on and on and on. Very important, these traits.
Yeah. And that was an amazing summary of the traits. And one of the big themes of your work is leadership and transition. So perhaps you'd like to touch on the challenges that these traits present for when a lawyer transitions into a leadership position.
Sure. So we know from the study of leadership at Harvard, from John Cotter's work, that leadership is basically a response to external change. When the world is uncertain and unpredictable, people in an organization want guidance from their leaders. They want to know, what should I do? What should I put my resources on? What should I prioritize? And that's what leadership does. It says it's an uncertain world. Nobody knows the right answer, but I'm going to step into the void and I'm going to see if I can direct us in a certain direction. And other research by Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner at University of California, they have shown that the things that dictate whether people follow leaders, in other words, what makes an effective leader, really boils down to behavior, not personality. Now, that doesn't mean personality doesn't matter, because it matters greatly, and I'll come back to that. But leadership is a function of doing 5 behaviors. So I'll give you an example. One of those 5 behaviors is that leaders take risks. They try new behaviors or new directions. And the reason, of course, is obvious. If we're leading because there's a world of uncertainty and we don't know what the right path is, by definition, we have to try new things. If we're in a world of uncertainty and we just say, well, let's stick with the tried and true, we're going to fail and no one will follow us. Leaders get followership by being willing to try new pathways. So, where does personality fit in? Personality dictates how comfortable or uncomfortable it will be for a leader to do these required behaviors. So again, sticking with the example of risk-taking, it's a necessary behavior. We can look to personality and see if your level of risk, which is a personality trait, your comfort with risk, does that line up with the trait? So if you're high on risk-taking, you like taking risks, then just be yourself and you can be a good leader. But if you're low on risk-taking, if you're cautious like most lawyers are, then it's not easy to do the risk-taking behavior and you're going to struggle. Does that mean you can't be a leader? No, not at all. All it means is that to be a leader, in this particular instance, you have to step into your discomfort zone and take risks, even though you don't like it, because that's what produces followership. So the behavior is what produces the followership. The personality trait tells us how comfortable or uncomfortable it is for you personally to do that behavior. So that's how it works. And sad to say, a lot of lawyers have traits that inhibit leadership. So high skepticism, not a good trait for leadership. High urgency, not a good trait for leadership. High autonomy, not a good trait for leadership. Low resilience, really bad trait for leadership, because when you're low in resilience, 2 problems occur. Number one, when you react defensively, we all know that leaders, because they're more prominent, they get criticized more than other people, right? So if you're a leader and you're a lawyer and low in resilience, most lawyers I said are low in resilience, you get defensive when you're criticized. Hey, I didn't do that. What are you accusing me of that for? And that undercuts leadership effectiveness. People won't follow leaders that are defensive because they feel like that leader is kind of weak. So leaders need to learn how to be resilient, how to take the blows that are inevitable in that role. So that's one reason that resilience is important for leadership. The other reason is, remember I said 90% of lawyers are low in resilience? If you're a leader and you're leading all low resilience people, you can't just pull a playbook out of the corporate world and say, I'm going to lead the way you lead normal people. You have to lead in a very educated way that takes into account the kind of eggshell nature of lawyers. And if lawyers are hearing this and they're saying, hey, wait 1 minute there, Buster, who are you calling thin skin? That's low resilience. That reaction is low resilience. That's what I'm talking about. So we have to lead in a much more bring out the best in people way. We have to lead in a way that is supportive and not critical. The old leadership style of, you son of a bitch, do this because I said so, that doesn't work in the legal profession. It doesn't work with 90% low resilience people.
In terms of the theme of resilience, obviously law is often a very high stakes, high stress environment. Which strategies do you kind of recommend for lawyers to manage that effectively, especially those in leadership positions?
So most of the strategies that are effective are also uncomfortable. But anything worth doing often involves a period of discomfort during the learning phase. So in my book, I talk about the scientifically based strategies that work to build your resilience and to become an effective leader. So the most important one is get better at the relationship stuff. And there are a lot of strategies for doing that. Simple ones like making eye contact. There's evidence that eye contact actually produces trust and positive emotions through the release of oxytocin. Longer term strategies include learning to be present. That is, when I'm talking to you, you have my undivided attention. There's no substitute, no parallel for undivided attention. It has magical properties. When you're here and present for somebody else, they feel engaged, they feel psychologically safe, and they're much more likely to trust you and build that connection. And that in turn will increase your resilience and will make you perceived as a more trustworthy leader. So it's two birds with one stone. Other strategies that work, there are a series of cognitive reframing strategies, which are very effective, but they usually require the help of an outside agent, a coach, or a psychologist, because they're very technical and sophisticated. They boil down to this. In psychology, we have what's called the cognitive model that says that our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors are intimately intertwined. Change any one of them, and it changes the others. So if you have emotions that are dysfunctional, disabling, not good, and you adjust your thinking, you can change those emotions, and that will change your behavior for the better. Cognitive reframing basically presumes that most people who are low in resilience probably have a self-critical voice in their head that is filling their head with all kinds of imposter thoughts or thoughts about what they're incapable of doing or self-criticism. And that produces that low feeling of low resilience, that wounded feeling. And if you if you identify what are those thoughts, and then you think of a thought that's more enabling instead of disabling, and then rehearse that thought, because it's the rehearsal that builds new pathways in the brain so that when you encounter a trigger in the future, that new pathway is available. If you don't rehearse it, if you just listen to this podcast and say, okay, I got that, when the trigger for low resilience happens, you're going to go default to your old thinking style. So you have to rehearse the new enabling thought so that it's like grease lightning. It's automated and it automatically kicks in when the old trigger occurs. So those would be some of the main strategies I recommend.
Great. And I guess kind of the last question is on kind of where you see your research going in future and also the study of kind of the lawyer personality. What are the things to look out for?
Well, there are a couple of things coming down the pike. Number one is change is on the menu. Change has been accelerating since the 1990s, but it's really accelerating these days. And it's especially visible, but it's certainly not limited to the technology field. So this week, I was reminded of that, quite strongly, because it's only Tuesday, and already 3 out of 4 emails and calls that I've received since yesterday have been about AI. Now, probably that's because, OpenAI released ChatGPT 4.0, which has got the whole, tech world abuzz. And reporters are calling me saying, what does this mean for lawyers? Law firm leaders are calling saying, what is the implication for lawyers? Recruiters are calling. It's all about what are the implications of technology for lawyers? And to answer that, my first thought is I will defer to my friend and colleague, Richard Susskind, who is the leading expert on the role of technology and the practice of law. And I'd certainly encourage you to reach out to Richard to find out his thoughts on this. My own take is a couple of things. Number one, I think that technology is certainly going to put really, really intense pressure on the billable hour. We've had that pressure all along. It's been increasing. But boy, if you can do something with ChatGPT in 10 seconds that used to take 4 hours, you can't bill by the hour. That just doesn't work. So you've got to find some sort of a billing system that works for the client and the lawyer that's an alternative to that. Number two, do we have to anticipate downsizing? Is more work going to be done by fewer lawyers? And from the associate's perspective, they're always asking, what will happen to us? Is technology going to replace us? And I don't think it will replace associates, because if you don't have associates, eventually you don't have any partners. Associates are training to be partners, and you have to have associates to build partners down the road. Even if you end up with fewer partners, you need some associates to train into those partners. So we might see fewer, smaller associate classes, fewer of them. But those few that make it into the associate ranks are going to have a better time of it, because the technology is going to take all of the boring, technical, dead, dull, dead, boring stuff off the table. And that leaves more sophisticated work for the associates who are in training. So that's, to me, a good possibility. And then I think it will probably accelerate this tendency, which you already see in the UK and Canada and Australia, which we're kind of flirting with, a little bit less rapidly here in the US. And that is people who are not formally trained as lawyers being authorized to play a significant role in a law practice. That clearly is coming down the pike, and I think that technology is accelerating that trend for sure.
Yeah, and obviously all of those developments will kind of impact or will feed through to kind of the traits of the people attracted to the industry and the science of personality as well.
That's right. And particularly, you can think the high urgency that lawyers have is actually going to play well with technology, because technology is kind of an urgent, medium. And some of the other traits, like skepticism, probably makes sense for us to be somewhat skeptical now that we've seen that these AI technologies can make mistakes. It all depends on how you set up the questions. And there's a room here for a healthy dose of skepticism, and so forth and so on.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Larry. That was a really interesting conversation. So first of all, where can people find you?
So the easiest way to find me is to go to my website, LawyerBrain.com, and note that LawyerBrain is all one word, the way I've marketed it. And on the website, you can find my contact information directly. You can send me an email or give me a phone call through that website. You can also download at no charge articles. There are blog posts available and lots of other information.
Excellent. And secondly, so your book's out later this year?
Late at the end of the year. That's right.
Late at the end. Excellent. And I'm sure everyone will be looking out for it. All right. Thank you very much for joining me.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me, David.